Hi there, and welcome back to DHQ. Today, we're going to be reacting to World War II Oversimplified Part 2. Last time we left off on this two-parter was the rise of fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, and the beginning parts of World War II, leading through various things, Phony War, appeasement campaigns, all that stuff, leading into actual, military action. And we'll be getting onto things pretty much after the failed attempted invasion of the UK and how Germany and the general war effort went from there. So let's jump right into this, shall we?
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community. Stick around until the end of the video to learn how you can get an exclusive deal just for Oversimplified viewers.
Yeah. Part 2, baby.
So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the defensive tripartite pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France's colonies in Equatorial Africa were like,
that was pretty much the Soviet
to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine. So he tried to take British Somalia.
It's never Italy's time to shine.
Well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring
no
to
way
Italy
the
as
UK no way the UK was going to be giving up Italy. Or not Italy, but Egypt. Egypt was way too important of a strategic position for the UK to give up on.
Underbelly. He began
gotta need a burn heel for that one.
And started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe," and sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to.
Pretty much.
Then I might." And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston. But you know what? Here, have some weapons." America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem.
Making big
German
bank.
U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "PackRat, you take some wood, you take some..."
Oh my god, PackRat. Oh god. Fucking PackRat.
You put them together, you get PackRat. And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some PackRat and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room. Then they tried to make a PackRat aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea. In the end,
I remember watching a whole video at some point about that project to make a PackRat aircraft carrier, and it is insane. Genuinely insane, because they wanted to make it both cheap, lightweight, and durable. And the material they landed on was PackRat instead of making it out of iron, because I don't think they were making massive steel ships yet, because this was still the 1930s. But the idea to make it out of what is essentially frozen wood, it boggles the mind.
Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, be
Or,
invaded. Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt, and they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite
the
having some
Aussies coming
success
in
the
for the
Middle East,
clutch.
the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out. With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground
the biggest
invasion
mistake
in
in
history, and
Hitler's
Stalin was far from ready.
entire
Both Churchill and
military
Roosevelt had
campaign.
warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern
Pretty much. It's what made it more baffling that he initially had that, like, agreement or partnership with Stalin to be, like, to both take out Poland. Because, like, his entire, like, his whole fucking plan for the beginning was to take out Russia. So it was weird for him to make that alliance with them.
The Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the
Nobody
Soviets would
expects
give
the
up
Russian
before
winter,
but they kept fighting.
except
His commanders came to him
it's
and
really
said,
easy
"Can we
to
please hold in
accept.
for the winter and
Expect.
wait until spring?" No. Keep going. But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles. That's fine.
Yeah.
Keep going.
This
We're
was
having
easily
to leave
one of the
corpses
biggest
our frozen
mistakes
horses by the side
of
the road so we can still find our way in the
Hitler's
snowdrift.
entire, like,
Perfectly normal. Keep going.
campaign.
Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold. And the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest?
Another big
And
mistake
so
of
it
the
was.
Axis
On December
powers.
7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast.
Fun fact. Well, not so fun fact, actually. I shouldn't be talking about fucking, like, you know, I shouldn't be saying fun fact in preface to talking about Pearl Harbor, but I guess just fact. My grandfather was actually stationed at Pearl Harbor on December 7th when it was bombed. I remember telling him telling us a story when I was like 6 or 7. I was old enough, barely old enough to remember it, that he was in the mess hall for breakfast when the air raid siren started going off, and he just thought it was another drill because they had those kind of frequently at the time, considering it was World War II at the time. But then he started hearing the explosions and bombs going off. And at that point, they kind of realized, oh shit, this is happening. And I don't know exactly how much veracity it is, but by his account, he jumped up onto like atop the mess hall on the roof and just started just shooting at Japanese planes that were flying overhead. Like, there's a reason why, he was one of the most stubborn people in his entire his entire group. And there's a reason why his nickname was Dykes, because he was as stubborn as a beach dike. You know, those big steel things that they stick in the sand. Like if you've ever played any World War II game that involves the storming of Normandy Beach, those big metal things that are impaled into the ground, the big 3D X's, those are dikes. And he was as tough as one, that's for damn sure.
Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though,
Japan basically did absolutely nothing.
They took Guam,
except for drag the United States
Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced
into the
Thailand
war
to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them.
The Manhattan Project,
in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease,
such a good idea.
and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely,
that wasn't going to happen.
Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack...
there was no way in hell they were going to take Stalingrad. Like, you're not going to take the place literally named after the leader of the country. Yeah, honestly, I'm not 100% sure what would have happened if the U.S. just didn't enter World War II. Because, I mean... because I know, like, the Red Army made a lot of progress in pushing Germany back, like, Nazis back to Germany. But at the same time, the United States played a pretty influential role in, like, the Western Front of the war. And was pretty pivotal in many of the decisions and actions taken. Not to mention the, like, weapons, vehicles, and also the eventual deployments of the atomic bomb. That certainly did make quite the difference when it came to at least knocking Japan out after the fall of Germany.
Resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, "No, you stay." The entire 6th Army was trapped and had to
once again
with
in the
complete
foot.
Air superiority. The
For
Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover.
The United States basically was like, with the additional manpower and weapons, like the military-industrial complex of the United States alone pretty much like made the difference in World War II. Like the additional manpower, weapons, strategic, like intelligence, like it pretty much like made the difference in World War II. Like, I don't want to be like, oh, America the saviors over World War II, but like kind of is. Oh yeah, the Pacific Front was not good, like, for either side. I'm pretty sure that was where my granddad was, because I mean he was in the Navy at Pearl Harbor, so it's probably like he probably saw some fighting in the Pacific Front. it like basically jumping from island to island and fighting on unfamiliar like micro land masses, basically.
British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible. With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. All right, said
Nice
the
and
Americans,
mucky.
let's do it our way as well.
Yeah, that pretty much led to like pretty much like a schism down the middle of Italy, because initially, yeah, the Italian people voted Mussolini out, and he was like, I'm pretty sure he fled from Italy, but then Hitler just kind of came back and reinstalled him as like a puppet, like as like a puppet head of state in like the northern half of Italy. And basically, like for a small portion of time, Italy was split in two. And it wasn't until like the eventual defeat of the Italian, like the puppeteered Italian forces by the Axis powers, and then the eventual execution of Benito Mussolini, that Italy was fully flipped for the Allies. Yeah, like they're like most American high schools do not cover like the large like breadth of World War II. Like you won't hear shit about like the Pacific Front, and you won't hear anything pretty much in detail about the war basically until America's involvement if you're in American high school. Like even in like world history, like they'll give you like ancient history and building up, but like once America's a thing, it's all central about America, pretty much. That's just kind of how high schools work.
Well, Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock
Generational screenshot, holy shit.
Massive, the likes of which the world has never seen before invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Normandy Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th,
the Brits and their freaking weather, man.
Raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied ships fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life.
Pretty much the only major like landing battle that most people know about, considering it's in the most media. I mean, it's in the opening to Saving Private Ryan, the opening to Call of Duty World at War. At least I think it's in the opening to Call of Duty World at War. I have not played that COD in a while. In fact, World at War and Black Ops were like the last Call of Duties I played before I just kind of like dropped out of the series entirely. Yeah, let me know down in the comments below what other Call of Duty games featured the storming of the beaches of Normandy.
Particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium.
Yeah,
In the
just
Far
like
East,
that.
the Allies started to push the Japanese
Just like
out of
that,
Burma,
they
as the
already
Americans
lost
launched
France.
a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end, and the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became.
Yep. If you want a good movie, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a kaiju nut, but a good movie that really like dissects the Japanese mindset during this like period, and especially surrounding like kamikaze, like pilots, and that overall mindset of dying with honor over living to survive. Go watch Godzilla -1. It is a phenomenal movie. It's not just like a good Godzilla movie, it is like a phenomenal movie in general, with like the messaging and story it tells from like the perspective of like Japan right after World War II, like after the devastations of the Tokyo fire bombings, the like everything. It is a phenomenal movie, and I 100% recommend it. It's on Netflix, so there's no like it's on Netflix. It's on all kinds of places. And really, if you have to sail the seven seas to watch it, then go watch it because it's worth it. It's worth like just watching.
February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands, but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I have just the trick. Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again." He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back.
Another major mistake
failed,
by
what followed
Germany.
Was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. Two of the Axis nations had been knocked out. One to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland.
Now just time for Japan.
The Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the U.S. ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured.
Japan definitely saw some of the worst
continue the devastating struggle
damage
off the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the first successful atomic bomb test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territories, and so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima.
Truman.
Then, on the 9th, Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. After 6 years,
that's one hell of an
war
understatement.
was finally over. The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years.
Wait, like literally, it's developed to not in Japan's favor, aka they're literally like dropping they're literally dropping the sun on us. So I think it's time for us to say adios to this whole war thing.
The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press.
To
this
picture
to the
here.
Japanese people that their Emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America.
Yeah, that picture right there is basically like a humiliation ritual meant to like show that like your Emperor, a tiny little dude. He's not this divine like figure. He's just a little guy who got way in over his head. and meant to basically just embarrass the Japanese people and make them see like, oh yeah, this was not like a divine war meant to facilitate us. Yeah, it really messed them up.
America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, two major superpowers with two very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between the two of them would create a new kind of war.
Yep.
A very, very cold one.
Cold War. Well, that was World War II. Yeah. There's a reason why we hope that we never have a war like that one again. It was, all in all over the place. But at least we know what oversimplified video to watch next. His video on the Cold War. Whenever I get around to it, you know. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Your general thoughts. Let me know if you had any family who fought in World War II. Any grandparents, great-grandparents, anything like that. Let me know down in the comments below and just kind of talk about them. Talk about your family. You know, not in a way that doxes yourself. Obviously not. Obviously not. But, you know, just like in general. And don't forget to hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel, ding that bell, and I will see you next time at the HQ. Bye-bye.